Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Hey.
I like it when you didn't have time to think of a fun way to
I didn't.
say hi.
Dang it.
I saw the gears started, and it was kind of like, hey. No, welcome everyone. Big headline in Nebraska. We had some snow, so we all get pretty worked up about that and start driving into ditches and things like that. We lose all control.
That's what we do.
Yeah, it's kind of our thing.
Nebraskans are pretty bad drivers, I will say that.
Oh, some Arkansas shit.
I'm just saying, I've noticed.
I was
pretty rough.
surprised that it was the first snow, and I'm driving into work, and there were so many accidents.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
Oh,
was
yeah,
like,
I saw that.
Did we forget every year how to drive in the snow?
It was super cold and like icy though, I
Yeah.
think, compared to some other snows. So, and obviously we didn't pre-treat the roads, I assume. So
If they did get pre-treated.
They did. I was going to
Did
say.
they?
I mean, at least they did over in my neck of the woods.
not mine.
Yours?
neighborhood.
Oh,
that's
way
for
out in the
sure.
old Westo with your swimming pool.
I did not have a swimming pool. That was not me.
I love that we just keep perpetuating this idea.
It's about time to winterize
Oh, gosh.
Thank
the
you.
pool. Anyways, I feel like I'm a good driver in the snow. Like that's
Yeah.
one of my things, like a strength of mine that I feel like, but
That's
maybe
good.
not.
Yeah, I
You
did
saw
see
me.
that on your LinkedIn.
Good driver.
What could I put here? Good snow driver.
To be fair, she
Wow,
was
what a
she was applying for a lot of school bus drivers.
That's true. I was desperate.
I do know that as part of my residency here at CCC, this is a little known fact about me, but I do have my CDL. I do learn how to drive school buses. That was
really?
kind of a requirement for a while
Yeah.
of the interns, because we used to be able to rent school buses for fall retreat and other events, because
Oh.
obviously we've got a lot of students. And so instead of renting 150 vans, not
Yeah.
that many, but a lot of vans, it was more cost efficient for us on staff to learn that and to get our CDLs and be able to
Wow.
drive school buses. So
Oh, that's quite the
I
shot.
could.
Do you have to keep that up every year?
I do keep it
yeah.
up. Yeah. So you have to
Okay.
pay a little extra
So
and
if
do
anybody's
some
in a
things.
pinch,
Yeah.
If you're ever in a pinch and you have a school bus,
You can't like haul like chemicals or anything
I
like
know
that.
I
You're
can't. I
not
don't
at
have
that
any
level.
of those.
Okay.
Just humans.
Just humans. Okay. Precious cargo.
Yes.
So yeah, it wasn't enough snow to really build a snowman or anything.
No.
It went away by the end of the day about, so.
Yeah, it was a bummer. Not as big of a bummer as Nebraska's game getting canceled
Oh,
this
my
weekend.
goodness.
Oh.
I know this
wow.
wasn't on the
How
topic,
long did it
but,
take to sneak that in? How long have we been?
Yeah.
but a little emotional.
Are
know?
you? Yeah.
Not. I mean, it was just. You knew it was going to happen, and it's worse for Wisconsin because I think they have to cancel a few games. But it's just it's a bummer. I mean, to have started back up, and especially when your team, like, I think different teams are taking it more seriously or are able to stop it, a little more because you're making more sacrifices.
Yeah.
And so it's a bummer, but it's life.
I'm sorry. But you know what? The weather is going to be nice on the 31st.
It will be.
And you could dress up as your favorite Husker player. And,
That's a great idea.
Martinez, maybe?
Maybe I'll do that.
So who is anybody dressing up for Hallows Eve?
Yeah. I mean, we're doing trunk or treat here. So my husband and I are going to be Dunkin' Donuts. So we're
Who's
going to wear
Dunkin' and who's Donuts?
We're going to wear basketball jerseys and then have like donuts around, like big inflatable donuts.
Oh, I get
That's
it.
very
Dunkin'
Get it?
cute.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Donuts.
like that.
That's really good. I don't have a fun costume. Does anyone else?
I
I was going to go as sexy nurse, but they were sold out of my size.
yeah. That would have been a good one.
Yeah.
Well, especially knowing that we're going to have that conversation in a couple of weeks with
True.
some sex experts.
Yeah.
Sexperts.
Yeah.
Way to tease that.
Yes. I didn't know what else to do
What do you do with that
to
comment,
save that
really?
moment, to make it redeemable.
Sorry.
I was trying to redeem the moment, okay?
HR has already been called. It's fine.
I do have a costume
Tell
trunk
us.
or treat.
Oh, you don't want to share it though?
I don't want to share. I want people
It's a
to
surprise.
show up to trunk or treat.
So we're gonna have to follow up with you next week.
Yeah.
Follow up with
Yeah.
me next week, or maybe, if you're listening to this today and you're like, I don't really have any plans, come to trunk or treat this evening
You'll
at
see.
CCC. If you show up on any day beside, October 30th and you're listening, don't show up.
What
Yeah.
time should they come if we're
This is
6 o'clock.
This is tonight.
This is
technically.
tonight.
Oh,
technically,
yeah.
yes.
6 o'clock tonight.
Yep.
Come on out.
All right. Well, that's fun.
wait, I was going to say mine.
Oh yeah, I thought maybe
I'm
you
going to
did-
be a Christmas tree. I have a Christmas tree onesie that I
Oh,
you just-
love.
I have a Santa
and
onesie.
then Ben dresses up as Santa, so that's probably what we'll.
I
it's,
love
very,
that.
it's a way to bring in the holidays.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's good to know everyone's Halloween plans.
And it's good to know yours fell
Yeah.
through. Very good to know
this
for
is
all
true.
of us.
I'm not going to argue with you there. Up next, headlines. Our first headline this week is from NBCnews.com. It says Scott Peterson, who killed pregnant wife, faces death penalty at resentencing. So if you haven't kept up with this story, they are they've obviously are retrying the case. A really tragic story. And I wanted to mention that we do listen to your emails, or if you message us on social media, we kind of sign off with that every week. And this headline was sent in by, I'll call him super fan of the show, Mr. Andrew.
Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
Yeah, if you're watching right now on Facebook Live, hi. You can always watch this live at noon Central Time on Facebook Live if you want to join in the chat there. But thanks for sending this in to us. So this story was posted on October 23rd, and it says the California prosecutors disclosed Friday they will seek the death penalty again against convicted killer Scott Peterson 2 months after his capital sentence was overturned. These sorts of things are, they can obviously very emotional, and also sometimes it feels like it can be very cut and dry, black and white in this sort of thing. I think anyone who, could put themselves in the shoes of losing a loved one, a sister, a daughter, whatever, to this type of tragedy, you kind of feel like you'd know what the right answer is. I do think that the death penalty in general, like capital punishment, is a little bit of a tricky topic to navigate as Christians because, life is sacred. People, Jesus teaches that people can be redeemed. But wow, how do you forgive something like this?
I know.
Collective deep breaths. Everyone's kind of just like, wait.
It's a lot.
Thanks for the light topic, Andrew.
Yeah.
Andrew. I think it's one of those things where it's easy to have an opinion on when we're degrees separated from it. So
Yeah.
a story like this, we could talk about our feelings on capital punishment. If this was in my immediate family, I think maybe that means like my feelings aren't totally settled on all this stuff, because I feel like it would be different if it's closer to me. Like I would really
Yeah.
struggle with like forgiving and not want somebody to pay for something.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's heavy.
Yeah, it is very heavy. I'm just processing in my mind.
Alex is like, this is the first I've heard of this story.
No, I've heard of this story. There's so much emotion that goes into it. Obviously, there's people who have actually fought against that for victims of those who have, slain their loved ones or whatever. So there's so much that goes into it. Yeah, this was kind of a one that I'm like, I remember that way back in the day when that happened, and it kind of made national news. But it is just a difficult kind of thing. I didn't really understand fully why it's coming back up again, but I think that goes into some of the people who would say why the death penalty, even just cost-wise, costs more, because there's always this more litigation, and someone continues to fight it and all that kind of stuff, versus other parts of prison reform and things like that. And so I think it is just a reminder of the need for prison reform overall. I don't have the answers of what that means, but I know we had even on we had a redemption story happen on this podcast, or it didn't happen on the podcast, but someone that was a bank robber and ended up finding Jesus and a great redemption story, and is fighting for a lot of prison reform in one of our guests. And so I don't remember what episode that was, but I can get back to you guys later.
Okay, follow up.
Yeah. So,
and I think there are a lot of cases where it's easy to point at something like that and say, yes, we need to reform these things. But then I think there are people who have had their families destroyed by an individual and can almost, righteously say this person, needs to be punished for what they've done. But I know the capital punishment is one of those things. I think growing up, it was just kind of a given, like, oh, if you kill someone, then you deserve to die. End of story. There's no, there wasn't a lot of conversation around it. But I would say as I've gotten older, I've just become deeply convicted by it in a lot of ways, and I think because of how challenging that is to myself, like if I were to put my own family member in this, if he would have killed one of my sisters who was pregnant with one of their children, like that idea, I would feel like this was justified. But still, I think that's why it's such a important thing to think about, because you are wrestling with that, and where should a Christian land on some of these topics.
I feel like with these headlines I try to see, well, how does this impact me? Like how is this headline influencing me? Because I mean, obviously we're removed from it, but I think for me it was a whole like justice versus grace kind of moment, where it's like you read this and you're like, yeah, like he did that, and the justice is like, his punishment is justice. But like just thinking about how Jesus and like God so perfectly bring justice and grace together and like make it one thing, it just blows my mind, because it's so hard for humans to bring those things together. It's either, grace, maybe too much grace, or justice and like too far on the justice. It's just like, for me, that was just brought me another sense of awe of just like God and like who he is and how he can have justice and grace at the same time. Like that's just crazy to me.
Yeah. Episode 23, by the way, I found it.
Wow,
I know how to use the internet. So that was when we had Sean Hopwood on and talked about that.
That's a good one.
For me, I guess even honestly, for the moment of pause earlier, I was trying to process to talk or not talk about it. But like I've been in a situation in my own life with a friend who ended up getting convicted of murder and going through the whole trial and processing all that kind of stuff. And it's a difficult thing, because I was his friend, cared about him and all that kind of stuff. But then you see the injustice that happened throughout the trial, and what had happened, and her family's grief, and all of the things that kind of went along with that. And so just kind of seeing it from a front row perspective, I think it's just easy for us always to be distant, like you were saying, Jess, to like or you were saying, Eric, too, like if this is your siblings, it takes on a different form than like a talking point about us reading something else. And so like I believe that no one's above redemption and hope for stories of redemption and all of those kind of things. And so I think as I've gotten older and understood some of this more, I even think of like a local thing that happened here, or anytime that somebody is a mass murderer, even here there was, someone there was a murder trial during all the protests with Jake Gardner and James Scurlock, who passed away, and they ended up calling up the grand jury, and the grand jury said, hey, we're going to have Jake come in and we're going to have him put on trial because of the murder. And so, and that's what they were going to debate and have those conversations around. And then I remember like people wanted justice, for James and to have a trial and all that kind of stuff. And then when you do hear about stories, and a lot of times maybe that's a mass murder type of situation too, when somebody, instead of facing justice, they kill themselves. And in that kind of situation, it also feels like there wasn't justice, like that was the way the person wanted out. And so it's just this weird dichotomy of like, okay, we want somebody to pay life for life with that, but then if we don't get the closure the way we want it to, then it feels different too. And so I remember just struggling between both of those. So
Yeah.
There's never an easy answer there. But I think in all matters of life, it is sacred. And I think, even whether it's talking about abortion or the capital punishment, as Christians, I think we need to value and protect the sanctity of life. All right, let's move on to our next headline. I'm sure it'll be much easier to go through. And I kind of wanted to preface this one with, we had a conversation about talking about this specific story before this recording. And I think to anyone listening, I think this is valuable, as well as for us, is that as we process these things, as we have these conversations, I know speaking for myself, I can get very passionate about things that I believe in, or that my own personal opinions, and that's where it kind of ends, though. Too sometimes we have opinions, and that's what it is. It's something that isn't always necessarily right or wrong, but it's an opinion. And so I hope, as we discuss these things, I think we want an open conversation. We want people to, in this room specifically, to feel like they can share their thoughts and disagree, and that's healthy, that we can do it gracefully. We don't have to be mean, we don't have to call each other names, but we can disagree, and it can be fine. So I just kind of wanted to preface that with this one as we dive in, because I think there might be a little disagreement.
Yeah, and I don't know if people really know like the behind the scenes of this podcast.
Yeah,
like,
I think that would be good.
I feel like it seems like, we just come on and have these conversations, kind of off the fly, and but we actually have these conversations beforehand, and that's our real initial, like, I feel like maybe more raw responses to these things. And so we're actually having to learn as we're doing this podcast to have these conversations with each other.
Yeah.
And like there's some times when it is hard. It's not like just this easy, like, oh yeah, we're recording this podcast and that's your thought. Oh, that's great. This is my, that's not how it works. Like, there's still moments when we talk about things and it's kind of like, oh man, you believe that? I don't really believe that. And that's, how do we come together on this and figure out, a better way to talk about it. So it's not, I feel like we have a little bit more of a, not polished version here, but we've already kind of had that initial, like, I don't know, like gut punch of like, that's what you believe, kind of thing. And so it's interesting.
And those conversations are not nearly as, polished or protected. I mean,
right.
They're much more rough.
And I think our heart is really to show how we disagree. So, I mean, maybe sometimes it comes off that we don't have as strong of opinion as somebody else, but our heart is to really set that example of, hey, we can disagree. We're all sitting around the table and we have different walks of life, different viewpoints, but we respect each other. Like Eric, I respect you, Alex, Rachel, and where you come from.
You kind of gave Alex side.
Alex, Rachel. We really respect each other and each other's hearts. And so the goal behind that is just really to set an example of how we can dialogue about these things. But
all right. So this story comes from Politico.com. It says, which this headline is kind of silly, but this is all about Jesus, a Christian rocker's COVID protest moment. Movement. Sorry, I said I can't read today. I was more stressed out that I was going to mispronounce his last name because I can never say it right.
I know.
Is it Sean? Can anyone correct me? Is it Feucht?
I honestly
cannot try.
Feucht?
We may have to.
Feucht. I think it might be Feucht.
Anyways,
we'll go with Feucht. Sean Feucht. He is a worship leader from Bethel, and he's pioneered the Let Us Worship movement. He's been going around the country, mainly targeting areas where protests have broken out and bringing together enormous amounts of people to worship, which on the surface level, it sounds like a good thing. But why don't we, let's talk about it a little bit. He has a big event coming up in Washington, D.C. A lot of Christians have been backing him and praising him for expressing their freedom to worship. And I think this conversation has come up many times with the protests and COVID and like California churches getting shut down, things like that. Where do we all fall on this topic? And what do you think? What are your thoughts on it? Anyone? No one wants to go first. I mean, I'll go first, but I just didn't want to feel like I was dominating the conversation. So, I'll say my thoughts on it. I've watched this movement grow, and personally, I think it's a little bit irresponsible. I think for him to go around and encourage people to gather in big groups, they're not wearing masks, they're singing, which I know that this pandemic thing is tiring. I know we all have pandemic fatigue.
Yes.
I know none of us want to wear masks anymore. I know none of us want to social distance anymore. I get it. Like, I'm there too. And I was having this conversation with my wife the other day, and I'm like, I think that people, if you're like pro mask and you're like, hey, we need to do this, we need to still follow guidelines. Like, the cases are going up everywhere. We need to still, like, I know it's tiring, but we still need to try to work together. I think people are like, oh, you must like it. It's like, well, no, I don't, but I think it's responsible. Like, we don't know how to control this yet. We don't have a good grasp on it yet. And people are still dying. People are still getting sick. It is still a burden on the medical field. And I just think that there's a lot of personal responsibility. But I feel like what this does is it doesn't glorify God in the way that I think people want it to, or at least are portraying it to. I think it glorifies individualism. It glorifies this idea of that I have a right to worship the way I want, and I will get out there and I will show that I am free and I don't have to wear a mask, and I will sing these songs, and so it's all, it's not about, I want to make sure that I'm caring for my fellow human being and trying my best not to spread this disease. And that's not even to get into the things he said about the way it's causing racial reconciliation, which when he's going into cities where they are rioting because of things like George Floyd and things like that, there's a certain amount of maybe flippantness about those the protests and things like that. I know there's rioting, and we would never condone rioting, and I don't think any Christian should condone rioting or violence. But the protests are bringing about some racial reconciliation. But then to come and say, well, this worship event is doing a better job than your protest is maybe a little bit belittling to the movement as a whole. So those are, I think I got most of my concerns out about it, but that's kind of where, but I do see a lot of Christians who are just like, this is so good, we need this. And I don't know. So I've talked enough. Please, someone else talk.
All right. I think this is a loaded topic because I don't think there's just one thing within this topic. I think there is politics, there is religion, there is COVID, there is, racial reconciliation. There's not just one thing. And I think that's what's hard with this topic is that you have to pick one side on all of these things. You can't be in the middle. You can't pick one. You can't be like, oh, I believe this, but I also believe this. Like, everything is so polarized right now. And so a topic like this, it's like, well, if you support Trump, then you don't like COVID and you won't wear a mask and you want to fight the government and you want to worship God wherever you want to worship God and you don't care about other people. Like, it's kind of like you get put in that camp. And I think that's what's hard about this is I just don't think it's fair to put people in these specific camps when and not allow someone to maybe think through, well, what does a middle ground look like? Or what is, I understand why people are upset. I mean, it's not a fun thing to feel like the government is not allowing you to do the thing, to worship together or to be together, with your church body. And that's not a fun thing. So I understand where they might be coming from around that. And I think what's hard too is when people say, well, you don't love other people, if you're not, wearing a mask or whatever. I think that's hard too. I think there's so many just harsh points that I feel like, I don't know, this is just a hard topic because there's not really one right answer. There's so many things within this. So it's like, I can understand some of these things. And I'm just looking at this article and seeing that people are being baptized and people are worshiping the Lord. That seems like such a good thing. And so it's just it's hard because it's like, man, I want to see people believing in God. I want to see people worshiping him, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. People are coming together and worshiping God. Like, how cool is that? But I also see the point where it's like, man, but COVID, like they're spreading the virus. Like, I see that side of things too. And so I just, I can understand how this is a hard topic to kind of, I feel like I'm falling more on the middle ground rather than the hard, like this side or this side. So
I think you did a good job putting a voice to a lot of the weird feelings that I got from this article too, because it was like, there's just different things that are conflicting. The first thing I thought just initially was, okay, Garth Brooks, like I just thought of him at first because I thought, he could decide that he wants to do an outdoor concert. He could bring racial reconciliation too. He could bring a lot of good. He could bring a lot of hope to America. Maybe not, he's not going to lead a worship service, but I thought, he's being respectful and he could bring 50,000 people to a crowd. And I'm like, if people that, are doing this professionally are literally losing thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars by not, doing their job.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know the motivations are different, but that was where what you said was just really helpful. Even for me processing it was, there's just so many different aspects of this that it's bringing out. So it's political, it's medical.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we can't say like, wow, this is awesome. All these people are getting baptized because somebody else is like, well, then you support all of them
exactly
being together and
right.
Oh, it's a hard time.
It's like 2020 wrapped up in one article, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is there a murder hornet nest close by?
Oh man, the thing that I'm always that I don't love as much about the headlines is literally I just don't have as much time to process them. Like I'm like, I want to be well informed, that's just us. That's reality. Like you get a headline, you deal with it, and you find out what you can, and then you
next
judge.
day there's a new headline.
How much am I going to put into this? Because how much does it affect my life and all that kind of stuff? And so, in this type of headline, I feel a lot of the same things that everyone's stated. Like I want to cheer on, like anytime the gospel is going forward and people are being baptized. I don't know any of these people. I want to cheer on boldness when people are bold in the face of, the ability to be adverse. And I talked about before, I think sometimes we put like ourselves into a scripture narrative where we're like, we're in Babylon and we're Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and we're avoiding the flaming fire and all those kind of things, which I think there's a lot of great principles to learn on how to do that well and reject the things that society is telling us and where to respect government, where to not. And so, there is so much inside of it that's just so nuanced and difficult. And I guess my caution is for people to not freak out just over headlines, to be able to have more dialogue around these types of things and be able to just say, yes, this is way more complex than it meets the eye.
Yeah.
And to be able to have unity and humility inside of this. And I think what often these things do is I'm seeing a bigger divide in the church probably than ever.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad in some ways that there's this big divide in the church, because it's like, if you are not for this, you don't have boldness, you don't love Jesus enough, if you trusted him enough, like we want to create JV and varsity, but both people think they're JV and the other is varsity, So there's people that think a varsity Christian would have zero fear, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. And they would go to something like this because they have trusted, Jesus, and because of their trust in Jesus, this is what allows them to go into this with great boldness. So there's people that say, that's what it means to be a Christian, following the Spirit and not living in fear. And then there's other people I would say, no, having a social understanding and having social justice and doing the right thing and caring for other people. I just kicked my can. I got so passionate about this. That person is what varsity looks like in Christianity. Right. And so much of it is like creating an us versus them mentality. And I'm like, I don't even know. Would I go to something like this? I probably would not right now. But then there's a part of me like, but if I don't, then there's there's some people that I love and respect, that love and respect me, that would say, you're just not Christian enough. You're not bold enough. You're a coward as a pastor for not going to something like that. And then on the other side, if I do go to something like that, it feels like so many times we're in just lose-lose situations.
Yeah.
And that's what's difficult, because we're in lose-lose situations because people don't want to have conversations. And that's what's so difficult about all this to me.
And I think that's what makes our kind of how we talked about respecting each other, our conversations with each other. We know that we all are like searching for God's truth, and we love God, and we want what his truth is to come out, and we want, to show his characteristics. We want that. And so it's not like any of us are making our opinions based on just, we just aren't thinking about God and just do, so that's why we respect each other so much, is because it's like, I know you've probably prayed about this, and that is what you're being convicted of, and I want to hear that. And I think sometimes we don't see past the opinions to the person and to their heart, and we just see their opinion, and then we just assume, well, you don't love God, or you must not be listening to him, or and I think that's where it gets kind of dangerous.
Well, and I think we talked a little bit about it before when it comes to like persecution and that sort of thing. Is this actually persecution? And no one's asking us to renounce our faith because of COVID or because of racial reconciliation or any of the other things going around. No one is saying you need to renounce Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. That is persecution. Let us be clear. That is persecution. There may be some things that feel like persecution or can be interpreted as persecution, but this is not necessarily biblical terms of persecution. I mean, there is a lot of nuance, but I do think there is also a lot of just truth in caring for God's people and caring for. We talked about the sanctity of life a little bit earlier, and also as we go into this topic of fear of the unknown, there are things that are unknown that we don't have to be fearful of, but we just have to acknowledge that we don't know. We don't know how severe or how much worse this COVID thing could get if we don't try to do our best. And I think that's where some of this falls in to, if you don't fully understand it, if you don't fully know what you're talking about, you shouldn't just be encouraging people to do things that could potentially be reckless. And I think as a leader, a spiritual leader especially, you should be willing and humble enough to acknowledge that you don't have the answers yet to this, and that just throwing your mask on the ground and going into big crowds and worshiping might not be the answer, even though that's really difficult and it doesn't look like it's not church like we used to have church. But this is the time to shine as a leader and guide your people through this. And I think that when I see stuff like this, it just seems reactionary and very just to be countercultural for the sake of being countercultural and not to actually follow in the footsteps of Jesus.
I think for me
he's getting a lot of attention.
Yeah, there's the thing that I keep going back and forth on is how fast this just all happened. I mean, in January, none of us would have thought we'd be having any of these kind of conversations. And so I do think no one's had time to process this. There hasn't been a class on all of these things. And so we're learning to trust, different scientific sources and doctors and trying to go through opinion and wade through all of this on a global scale and then a national scale with the middle of an election year. And so it's even harder to find truth inside of that. And people are trying to muddy, I think, truth on purpose in some ways to drive fear on both sides of an aisle. And if we're talking politically. And so I think part of it that sometimes makes me step back is, man, that happened so quickly. And I think if you let your mind wander to okay, what could the next thing be? I think that's where some of the fear can drive in. I think there's a lot of people that are they hate the masks, and to them, it's not about hating the mask. And it's more about then what's the next thing you're going to mandate me to have to do? And so I understand those people that's not where I land, but the more I talk with those people and I see their passion, I understand yes, okay, I can see where you're coming from. If this happens so quickly and you're mandated to have this to go into a certain place, then what's the next thing that we're going to have to mandate for you to be able to go into somewhere else? And so I get, like, there's fear for me around potential. And if I let myself get into all that potential, then I'm like, things could get really scary really quickly. And I think that's how quickly, the speed of it, I think, and the inability to react is sometimes what...
I totally agree with you. I think that the problem is it's the boy that cried wolf. And I think that when we have proof that Christians are being persecuted and singled out, then nary a Christian should be silent at that point. Like, we need to speak up and we need to fight for our faith. But that has not happened. And so I think that is where we don't have any proof of Christians being persecuted. And so until that happens...
In the United States.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. Like, by our government, we are not being singled out. And so, we might be by individuals or by certain groups or organizations or people, but we are not being, as a whole people, persecuted by the government. So until we have proof of that, we cannot act this way. We can't act out in these crazy ways, because then it's not going to mean anything when it actually comes time for the cards to fall on the table and everybody to be ready to go when something is actually going to be true persecution. People aren't going to take us seriously.
And Alex, going back to kind of what you're saying about how fast this has happened and how muddy the water is on what is true, what is real, trying to make decisions. I think another thing that can lead into this is the fact that, we can't rely on anything else, but we can trust in Jesus. I can't make a decision about COVID right now. I don't know what's true. I don't know the answers, but I can trust in Jesus. And that can kind of, I feel like, drive people, to do these things to where it's like, well, nothing else matters right now, but I know that Jesus is true. I know that God, is in control, and I know that is what is true without a doubt, even if I can't control these other factors or understand what's true about these other factors. And so I think maybe that could be driving people into these situations too, where it's just kind of abandoning everything else to look at the one thing that is true in their life and the one thing that they can count on and rely on. And maybe that's not, the best decision sometimes, but I can get into their mindset and understand where that could come from.
I think there's a fear, though, going back to what you said, Eric, about he has a message, but it gets diluted or it feels like it gets diluted, especially with this, when there's so many other issues going on. So maybe he wants to bring reconciliation, and that's the main thing. But look at all the other ripple effects that it's affecting. And this article even talks about, there's like 5 things. And just think about, just relating it to us, how often we've gone into a situation of, I just wanted to help. Like, I thought I was helping, or I had this message that I thought that you needed me and I wanted to do something, but maybe something I said wasn't received, or it wasn't the right timing. And how often we do that. And so I guess at the end of the day, this also reminds me of okay, what's my motivation? What's the message that I'm sending? And are people going to receive that based on how I'm acting or the circumstances?
Yeah.
I think the other part too is the best predictor of the future is the past, is history. And so I've seen some people too that go to extreme movements that are they want to compare it to Nazi Germany or things like that. And they're like, first thing that happens is you get silenced, and then after you get silenced, and that's where a lot of people, it's like, hey, we're being silenced. And right now, even the government's pulling in Facebook and Twitter and all these people on right now to have a conversation about, are we silencing people, and how much is silencing people leading to persecution and all of the people's feels that are out there. And so I think there's so much feelings and emotions that ties into it all too. But I think the other thing that we know that can also get depressing is there's just a time for every nation. The rising and fall of nations and leaders. And that scares me, because I want America to be awesome. I want America to be great. I want to prosper. I want comfort. I want all of this. But as I look into history, every single nation that God has blessed and been prosperous has fallen, and that's scary, because I can fight against it. And there's spiritual warfare, which we got into last weekend, and some of that is physical warfare, some of it's spiritual warfare that causes that to happen. And I don't want to contribute to I don't want to be the person that leads it to its demise. But then I also live in the sovereignty of, gosh, I know this is going to happen and we're not going to be the ones that buck the trend.
Right. America is not immune to.
Yeah. And so that's what's difficult in that conversation as well.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of fear involved. Tease.
Amen.
All right. Yes, that's coming up here shortly. Our topic this week is fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown. It's October. It's the spooky month. Halloween is tomorrow.
Although every month has felt spooky
Yeah,
this year.
it's the spooky year.
What's happening?
If Halloween had a year, it would be 2020. We've talked about spiritual warfare. We talked about demon possession.
Such good discussions the past couple weeks.
A lot of good stuff there. And now I think to top it off, we're going to talk about fear. And a lot of that kind of can go hand in hand. I think around those topics of spiritual warfare and demon possession, there can be some maybe healthy fear and some not so healthy fear that comes along with those topics. And we're not tying this conversation specifically to that, but I think that's one aspect of it. Why don't we start with FOMO? I think fear of missing out is, something that we all face in this culture, especially with social media. When I tweet about that new Netflix series that I'm watching, and then someone at this table sees that tweet, and it's like, oh, I'm missing out. I really should watch that because Eric is so cool, and he just knows all the cool shows to watch. And I'm not gonna have my finger on the pulse of culture if I don't watch this cool show.
Were you in my head, Eric?
Yeah.
Oh man, I feel that about The Bachelor. Everybody's like, "Oh, did you see The Bachelor?" No, I don't. I don't watch that.
You don't watch it?
I don't. But then I feel like, but I can't have this conversation with them now about what they're watching. So
it used to be the water cooler. Now it's Zoom or something. I don't know. But yeah, how do you feel that though? Does everyone at this table at certain times felt like, I'm almost obligated to go engage in something culturally because everyone is talking about it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, fear of missing out. There's positive FOMO, I would say, and there's negative FOMO. So like positive, or I'll go negative first. Negative FOMO, I think, is when you're comparing your life to someone else, and then you like start to reorient your life to like if Rachel would start watching The Bachelor just so she could like feel significant and having conversations, and she's like, and I'm robbing it of time with my husband or whatever.
Right.
That I think is a negative fear of missing out. But I think another like fear of missing out that's positive is like, hey, I want to like community. Like if there's like a guys trip and I went on a guys trip, a bro trip, we went on a skiing or whatever sometime, and it was like the best trip ever for me, and not just like for fun, but like just good bonding and all that kind of stuff. Like I would have like I think a healthy fear of missing out. Like, guys, don't schedule. If you scheduled that around, a time that I couldn't come the next year because of a positive experience, it would drive me to like want to reorient my life in a healthy way around something like that. And so,
that's a good way of putting it, how you explained it, because it's almost like that fear of missing out in a positive way is like you're longing for relationship and community that we all have to some degrry.
Yeah, that's good.
But most of the time it's negative.
Most of the time it's negative. I know I fall into the trap sometimes where I'll start to see a bunch of hype around a TV show or a movie or even an album or a video game, and if I'll feel that kind of urgency creep up where I've got to see this, I got to investigate this, I need to know what it's about.
And that's such I feel like American culture is just that, like just emulating that. And I mean, that's how they advertise to us of like, if you don't buy this car, then you're not going to be able to drive out on these mountains and have this pretty view and go camping like in our ad or what, they show us things that are amazing that it's like, oh, I want that. If I don't have this, then I'm not going to be able to, do that or whatever. Right. Or if I'm not married, I'm not going to be able to experience these amazing things that people are. I mean, it's. If
I don't go to Jared,
things.
My proposal is going to be trash. Because
exactly.
She might say no.
Exactly.
She might say, "Did you go to Jared?"
Where'd you go?
No, I didn't. No.
Yeah.
Take that back and go to Jared.
It's cubic zirconium.
Not to bring up COVID again, but I'm going to, because I feel like COVID has brought on another weird FOMO thing for me, where it's been having to consider another layer of things. So, for instance, Valas, right? We do it every year. Like if you live in Omaha area, you go to the pumpkin patch. So like every year, my oldest is 6. Every year we take them and get a little picture by the how tall this fall. And so it's like that second guessing of, should we go? But I really want that picture, or I really want to do something.
Right.
And then there's just this layer of, okay, maybe I can't do something because I'm not invited or not going, but then am I going to miss something because I should choose not to go? That's really, really hard.
Yeah.
I think that plays into the way that fear causes us to act, the way that we just act out our daily lives, the choices we make. What are there some examples that you can think of where fear has played a role specifically in the choices that you make on a day-to-day basis? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Anything specific? No. Yes. I mean, I think some of those things, I know growing up, I would watch my dad never wear a seatbelt. I wear a seatbelt a lot today, and I give credit to my wife because she would beat me over the head with it, like, wear your seatbelt. But I just grew up not wearing a seatbelt. I grew up riding in conversion vans that didn't even have seatbelts. And so as I got older, though, and I think especially when I had children, all of a sudden mortality became so real to me where it wasn't before, that I started to be fearful of a lot of things. But I think in some ways that's probably a healthy way to, I choose to put my seatbelt on because I understand now that my body flying through a car is not a good thing. Like you have there's a lot of motion there. There's other things like that you make choices about in your day-to-day life. And talking to my kids about certain things, since they're back in school now, with COVID and everything, I kind of jokingly made like tip of the day when we get out of the car. I'd be like, "Hey, don't chew your friend's gum," just something silly. And I would do that every morning. And I forgot one day, and it was just funny how my kids are like, "What's the tip of the day, Dad?" And so I'm just like coming up with the most random things that I can think of that involve somehow, I don't know, eating or putting something in your mouth that you shouldn't. But it's just one of those things where I think there is fear that kind of guides you in a healthy way, where you make decisions, not out of. I think, and maybe I'm overstressing this because of COVID and this climate of like, oh, you're just a sheep. You're afraid because you're wearing a mask or stuff like that. You'll hear those things, and I think, well, yeah, there's fear that's built into us to help protect us.
Yeah. I think in a negative way, fear causes me to want control of things and to try and control every situation, every little thing. Because if I can control it, I know it's not going to go the wrong way. It's going to go the way that I want it to go. And so, I mean, that just looks like, planning things exactly how I want them. And if it doesn't go through with my plan, that's not okay. Like, I'm not very flexible with things, and I want it to be exactly how I planned it. And yeah, just grabbing that control as much as I can, because if I can control it, then nothing bad's going to happen.
Right.
And that's like, I think that's one of the biggest things that people do when they are afraid is they try to control the situation. If they can't control the situation, that adds more fear to the situation because, they don't know what's going to happen. They're not in charge. And so I think that's one of the ways that I feel like fear kind of impacts me.
I feel like I've been negatively affected by fear of, it's affected my value. So there was a time in my life where I didn't feel like I was being heard or what I was saying mattered. And maybe that was partly them putting that on me and partially me perceiving that, but it had affected me negatively in the future because I thought people didn't value what I said or what I thought.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times our fear is rooted in a truth that happened at some point in our lives. And then we just have chosen to believe that and kind of we integrate it into our life. So a lot of things of like, have we stopped and looked, hey, where's the root of this? And that's where I kind of had to fight that is, okay, I'm feeling this often and I know that these people love me.
Right.
So where did that come from? And just taking that time, like, God, show me where did this happen to me where I was hurt? And then this has turned into a fear where now I can't speak up.
Mm-hmm. That is so good. I love that because I feel like that's something I've learned these past couple of years of diving into the root of things that are controlling us. Like, I just think people are so often like, they just explain it away, or they're just like, well, that's just how it is, or I'm just always going to be afraid of this, or that's just, instead of stopping and taking time to just really like sit with the Lord with your fear and ask him, what is this? What does this come from? Why am I feeling this way? Help me get back to the root of this and healing from some of these things that are causing those fears.
Right.
And I just think people just don't take that time. They just kind of move past it because that's just, a part of life.
Because fear it's a normal thing. It's a good thing.
Right.
To some degree. And it's one of our, like, if you're thinking psychology, like my mind is kind of in both places. I mean, fear is one of our 6 basic emotions. And so it was made for us when there is a situation where if someone pulls a gun on us, or, there's going to be a car accident or something's going to happen, it's there, but it's the ripple effects of, if it continues to last longer, the negative ways it can impact us.
Right.
And I think that's why, when we talk about fear or any of those emotions, why it's so important to leave dogmas, especially like counseling and things like that. Because we are people that like to treat the symptoms and not the disease a lot. And so for a lot of times, like, we're like, just behavior modification will change us if I'm afraid of this. But usually there's a deeper reason, and a lot of times it's actually tied to our identities, I think, that our identity will get shifted, or other people look at us differently. Like, I remember, being a kid going, like, I was afraid to spend the night at people's houses. Why was I afraid to spend the night at people's houses? You ask, because
Why?
I wet the bed. So like when I was younger, like my kidneys just didn't work. So I wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night until like I was, 15 and I had medicine. And so I had all that kind of stuff. And even when I got a medicine to do that, it had to be refrigerated, this medicine. And so like I would lie and be like, hey, if I'm going to spend the night, I got to have this medicine. It's for my allergies, because I don't want anyone to know.
I'm allergic to wet in the bed.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm just allergic, so I got to take these allergies at night, and it's got to stay in your parents' refrigerator.
Yeah.
So I can take it. But then that like drove a fear of, but ultimately the fear was like being found, and it was my identity. What are people going to think about me if they knew this? But the reality is, like, if I have good friends, like, they're going to have empathy for me, and they're going to care for me, and they're going to be like, yeah, dude, if you're not going to pee on our couch, we would love for you to have this medicine, right?
Yeah.
But like, so much of me was living in fear because I wrote wrong scripts of what was going to happen, and all I wanted to do, which kept me from living life and probably experiencing friends the way I should have, was just to treat the symptoms instead of like, no, this is really about projected fear as well, which happens a lot of times in our lives, is we just project what we think will happen.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And we were talking about that even earlier. We project mask equals vaccination for enforcement and all of that. And it could be true.
Right.
It could not be true, but so much of our projections in fear are the things that keep us from experiencing things.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. It's that fear where we face, it's the unknown of, okay, what's going to happen? Or it's why people like scary movies or haunted houses. It's that we don't know what's going to happen. And so our minds fill in that gap of, what are they going to think about me? They're going to think this because we don't know.
Right. Right.
Fear of unacceptance, fear of failure.
Right. It's like fill in the blank. There's
it all falls
so
in
many
line.
things.
I think even an election year, there's a lot of fear right now because of who's going to win the election.
Yeah.
And I think depending on who you talk to, they'll say that if one person, Trump wins the election or Biden wins the election, that, the world's over. It's a big deal. According to all the Facebook videos that get privately messaged to me, if Trump doesn't win, it will be a really bad time. But yeah, I think fear plays a part there, because I don't know that either way things will change that much by who the president is. It's an irrational fear.
This is something I've been in prayer a lot with God about, just fear of, I just am ready for the election to be over. I'm ready for COVID to be over. I'm ready for all these things to be done so that I can know the answers. I can know the results and move on with my life. And I think when I was praying about this, I just was like, oh man, God really just hit me with like, what if there wasn't ever a result? Or what if this just kept going? Or what if it was the result that you didn't want? How would you live your life? Would you still have faith in me? Would you still be serving me? Would you still live your life in a way that is honoring to me and serving me? And I was like, well, of course. But it's like, why aren't you doing it now? You're just waiting. You're just waiting for these answers. You're waiting for these results. And right now I have you in a place where I want you to do things and where I want you to serve me and all this stuff. And it was just very convicting because I feel like a lot right now in this season, it's just, and when you're afraid of something, it immobilizes you sometimes. And that's what Satan wants. He wants you to stop. He doesn't want you to move forward on anything. And so I think that was just really convicting for me of just like being, man, what right now, I'm in this day right now. I don't know what's going to happen with the election. I don't know when COVID's going to end, but right now, what are the things that God's calling me to? Because I can act on those things even if I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so that was just really convicting for me. Just especially with like elections, talking about who's going to win. I don't know, but I can only do what God is calling me to do right now.
Yeah. I think if just a totally biblical resource that I was trying to remember who wrote it, but for me that helped learn some of that. And I think the word that is the actual root of what I was trying to say is identity, but it's shame. And so there's a gal named Brene Brown who's written a ton on shame and like research shame. And for me, I've read like 3 or 4 of her books that have really helped me understand like, and that's that part of you write something and then you start judging everything based off of that, and it's not even true, but how much shame influences fear and how that's really the thing in a lot of our lives, because that's what it was for me. Like it was shame of being found out, of being and I couldn't fix any of it, like as a kid, but how much shame in my life just is a catalyst for fear in my life. And it also has helped me build empathy for people that do, are on both sides of an extreme, that for them, I'm seeing not necessarily the deep-rooted things in their life. I'm just seeing the symptoms play out.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be somebody that's casting on shame onto them, that like, hey, if Trump is elected and you're really afraid right now, you have a genuine fear that if Trump is not elected, that everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
A lot of that is rooted in some identity and probably some shame and all. And I don't want to be the person that piles that on them. Like, you're so stupid. How could you believe something like this?
Right.
And so I very rarely found that kind of stuff helpful, or Biden or whoever it is. And so I think the more we know about ourselves and treating that and how the symptoms play out, the more hopefully empathy we have to look at people in a different light and say, man, the shame in my life, the places that I place my identity that are not true, they play out in different ways in my own life. And I want to overcompensate for my shame by trying to prove to everybody I know everything. That's one of the things. Like, I want to be the most informed, and I want to have all the right answers, because I know that I don't. And so I want to project myself as that person. And a lot of people do that. And so I think it's a lot deeper than in my life, but it's a lot deeper in the people I respond to and react with, or have conversations with. And a lot of times I'm really mad at the symptoms, but the disease is deeper in someone's life.
Yeah, that's good.
One thing when we had the earlier conversation, obviously before we're recording today, of what the topic was going to be, I just had asked a few random friends and my siblings, what is a fear that you have? And every single one of them, it wasn't like something that started yesterday. It was something that happened when they were really young. And so I've been thinking this week about, Satan, the enemy. Those lies begin when we're young.
Yeah.
And they, it's imprinted in us when, I'll throw like pornography in there or anything that happens when we're young. And so even as parents, it's never too late, I guess, to have a conversation with your child or with somebody about that. But just thinking, like, even as parents, like those fears are developing now, that shame that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It doesn't just start when you're in college. Like, this starts very young. And so,
Right.
and I know we'll talk in a couple weeks about just like having those, like how to have those more difficult conversations with your kids. But just that put me in that mindset of just like, we can probably all think of something that happened when we were young and just how far back we can trace it.
Well, and how much are we, I mean, I don't want to get into the COVID thing a ton, but how much, if I am just saying to my kids, hey, we don't wear masks in our family. People that wear masks are stupid. They're uneducated. They're dumb. I'm building in them something that's deeper than I realize I'm building into them that they're going to take into the future, and vice versa. You know, if I'm walking around like, buddy, no, don't step out of the house.
Yep.
Do you have your mask on? And like, I'm just panicky all the time.
Right.
I'm building in them a fear. And so I think it even helps, like, a lot of times we don't want to like have this deep conversation with our kids because we don't think they're going to understand it at a deep level. And so it's just like, I told you, just do it because I told you so. And so as a parent, even as I'm processing all of this, you know, it's kind of the 9/11 of our day. I don't want to be afraid of always getting in airplanes. And I remember having that fear for a little while as a kid, even though I was in high school, and we talked about that, you know, a month ago on the September 11th episode. But I think even now, what are we doing around this mask topic, no matter what side we fall on, that's creating ripples in the lives of our kids by just, or the people around us, young people that they're going to live with, this generation is going to live with that for a long time. And so how are we contributing?
I mean, I think for me, the conversations I have with my kids are about, we respect others. We respect their right to be healthy. And that's why we put on a mask. It's not because we're comfortable in it and we like to wear it. It's because we want to respect the people around us. And we don't want to take away their safety, their healthiness, whatever. I think when you're talking about irrational fears and things like that, I can't, my mind can't help but go to, let's say 4th grade Eric. He was a bit husky. He would stand at a lot of hotel swimming pools and just look at them and think, man, I'd like to get in that pool, but I was too afraid to take my shirt off. And so eventually I just go in with my shirt, you know, but it was one of those things where that was shame. That was irrational fear. What was the worst that was going to happen to me? You know, someone was going to say something. I don't know. You know, you put these thoughts into your head. And I think when you were talking about your bedwetting thing, my mind went back to that instantly. You know, all these things are Jess even talking about how so much of this is built into us as children. There's just so many things that happen to us that condition us to be where we're at now. And I think identifying that is good, but yeah, I think irrational fear can kind of be over consuming, and
it's that spirit of fear. It's controlling, it's paralyzing. It takes our view off of the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's when we're leading like that, that's what we're doing. When we're leading with it, we're leading others in the same direction. If it's our family or our friends, and it's just like, where is that fear of the Lord when we have our eyes on Him? It's a big shift. And I mean, that's where we find our identity and remembering our foundation. I think so many times I picture myself, I mean, in this day and age of like standing on top of a ball that's like, I'm trying to balance and I'm trying to like get to the next thing. And so it's consuming, it's paralyzing, because that's all I can focus on is that fear. And I don't think about how God's hands are on my shoulders, like balancing me, and I'm not going to fall off. Like, I don't need to fear that, but my gaze is in a different place. And so
I mean, in that, what you said there, I think you mentioned fear of God, and also God, you know, kind of being there as our comforter. The Bible talks about fearing God and His wrath and things like that. And I think that's sometimes, and then we talk about God the Father, right? And so I think those two things sometimes are hard for people to wrap their minds around. And I'm supposed to fear God, but He loves me, and what does that mean? I think about my dad, and I think he raised me pretty well, and I had a pretty healthy fear of my dad. It wasn't like I was scared to always go to him or anything like that, but I knew if I did something wrong, I would get, you know, he'd set me straight. So I think there should be a healthy fear of God, but not a fear that would keep us from that close relationship with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in scripture it can feel, we love magnet verses, and there's two, I think, like, hey, they're good on a t-shirt, they're good on the magnet at your house, but we don't really understand them. And I think
or we write them off because they're so
overused.
common.
So I think one of those is like in Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. So fools are people that don't fear God. But then on the flip side, you get into the New Testament and you read 1 John 4:18, it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out all fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. And so it's like, wait, I need to fear God to begin to have knowledge, to have wisdom, to figure things out. But wait, it says in 1 John, if I do fear, I'm not made perfect in love. And so I think it gets confusing for people to be able to use that word fear. And wait, what do you mean? Should I fear? Should I not fear? And so what do you think is the difference, I guess, between fearing God, fearing the Lord, beginning knowledge, and then we shouldn't have fear? Any thoughts on that?
Jess?
Fearing the Lord.
How do you reconcile those two?
It looked like he was directing the question at you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I still think this is a hard thing to figure out. I think it's hard to figure out because we don't understand that relationship based on earthly relationships, if that makes sense. Like you talked about your dad. Like, I don't think there's ever a perfect earthly relationship that helps you understand fearing this person is okay, or this is a good fear of this person. I just think it's a hard concept to understand. And I mean, I still struggle with that doesn't make sense. Why should I fear God? I mean, I know he's powerful. I know he can do whatever he wants, and he has this wrath, but also I know that he loves me and he wants to take care of me. It's like, what does that look like? So I still struggle with understanding that concept.
When I think about a spirit of fear, I think about like when that's controlling someone, it's trying to take the place of where the Holy Spirit and where God's given us, because that's what deserves that space in our lives and what he's given us. And to me, that fear of the Lord is seeing that, and it's also it's putting God in the place that he deserves and he wants to be. But it's so hard because the world puts so many things on us to distract us from. I mean, I'm thinking right now, sorry, I'm like jumbled, because Wendell's words are playing in my mind from last week, where he said, everything like in this world is trying to throw us off our mission. Yeah. And so those things, anything that's trying to get in the way of that. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
It's kind of, I think it's a respect in a way too. Like I think of people who I respect in different authority positions, I do have a healthy amount of fear of them as well. And it's not negative fear. It's just that I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to do something that would cause them to think less of me. And I think that there's that. But then I also think when it talks about not having fear, it's of our own faith. I think sometimes we as Christians can be, speaking for myself, we can be very shy about sharing our faith. We can hide it under a bushel, that sort of a thing where we are fearful of what people are going to say about us if they know that we're a Christian, or how are they going to react if we share our Christian values and things like that. So I think that's maybe where some of that scripture is saying you can't be fearful. You have to be strong in your faith and share that.
I think fear of the Lord, so I was processing it. So I finally found where I had written down something. And basically to me, fear of the Lord is never shrugging off or making light of something that the Lord has told us or commanded us to do. Yeah. But we do not have to fear his judgment. Right. That is something that's removed from us. So it's like, we're not going to go and like shake our fists and like defy our parent or something like that, or be disrespectful. So to me, that's like the fear of the Lord is taking seriously what he says.
Right. That's good.
Does that fair?
That's good.
I think that's a good.
I was trying to simplify it for like the simple-minded people like me.
Yeah. I think that's a good, and I think there is a definition that's different between being scared and having a fear of God. And so I think, I took my kids camping a couple weekends ago, and our youngest, it was the first time she had been around like a campfire, right? And so one of the things we have to teach her is like, that's really cool. That's awesome. In this perimeter, this is really good. You know, it's helping us get warm because we're really, really cold. So it's having this respect, this proper respect for what the damage it could do, but also the goodness it brings in our lives.
Yeah.
And so I think having a proper respect of God is good. Like one of the things, even for me in my walk with Jesus, I think the more close I get to God, the more I have a fear of him, but it's not being afraid of him. It's the more I realize how vastly holy he is and good, and I'm not. And I think that's a healthy thing, and it continues to draw me in. So I think a healthy fear of God never drives us away, but it drives us towards him. So if it's something that's driving you away from God, then I would say that's not a fear of the Lord, but it's drawing us. If it's driving us away, then that's not a healthy fear that I don't think God wants us to have inside of our lives. And so, you know, for me, that's been a thing that the more I know, and the more I know who God is, the more I have a fear of the Lord, and I know who he is, and I discover who he is, the more I actually in turn am discovering who I am, who he created me to be, and am being made more and more in his image, which is the invitation of sanctification and all of our lives. And so,
well, and I think sometimes people take the fear of the Lord the wrong way too, and can kind of take it as like, if I don't do these things, then God's not gonna love me, or he's not gonna be, you know, proud of me. I just think about like reading your Bible every day, or praying, or going to church every Sunday. I think sometimes people might misinterpret that as like, I have fear of the Lord, that he's going to be disappointed in me, or he's not going to love me if I don't do these things. So I'm going to do these things so that God will love me. And so I think that can get kind of thrown in with all of this too, and just cause a lot of confusion.
Kind of the by faith not works.
Exactly.
Sort of
exactly. Yeah. So it is, you have to kind of really think about it, how Alex, you are thinking about it.
Well, in this conversation of fear, as we kind of wind it down, let's just share a little bit, kind of briefly, how everyone deals with it. What's the best way that you found to cope with maybe irrational fears or other legitimate fears, whether it's spiritual or not spiritual? I don't think that needs to be, you know, I think prayer is really good and really powerful, and it's important in our life, but I also don't know that we want to just give it the blanket answer of how I pray about it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
One of the first things, I guess, for me is, I don't know when it was, a couple of years ago, I looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of fear. And fear is a noun. It's not a verb. That was very comforting to me, because it's not an action. It's not something that's just going to happen when I'm scared. It's a noun. That gave me power over fear. In a way, it was empowering for me, because to me there was some, I guess maybe control, because we're looking for control, but it was kind of a way to rationalize and think through that of, hey, it's a fact, it's a normal emotion, and realizing that fear is a normal emotion, but then how are we going to process through that? So for me, that's kind of where I started. The verse, like, I can't remember the whole verse. Alex, you got it. But the verse that talks about like, take every thought captive. And I just, when I am fearful, I just say like, God, take my thoughts captive. And I try to be mindful of that. And then one thing I was reminded of when I read Jenny Allen's book this summer, Get Out of Your Head, you know, one of her main messages is, have you talked to God about it?
Yeah. And
that was really convicting to me of a lot of times, I find myself, and also, you know, just through doing therapy with others, is we come to God, or we come to a friend or a family member, a therapist, for help when it's an emergency room situation. And it's so important. Like, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I'm not really struggling with fear. Well, this is a great time to think about what you're going to do and how you're going to process that when it does come up, because that's empowering. Like, you have something with you, you know, God's truth, you know how you're going to process through something. So for me, kind of those 3-4 things are how I, you know, process through it. But then, you know, I'm still
It's really
I
good.
struggle with it, especially being a mom, like
Yeah.
having 3 kids. It's like, I'm not just scared for myself, or fearful of myself. It's like, okay, where are they at?
Yeah.
Or they're not with me. What's happening,
Yeah.
So those truths for me, at least help, keep me a little more steady on that ball I'm, trying to balance on.
Yeah. I think another thing, something that I love to do when I'm in situations like this of just maybe having a hard time trusting God or having a hard time understanding what's going on or having fear of something, I love to look back in my life and see what God has already done in my life. And I think sometimes that helps me come back to, oh, okay, I was afraid of this thing, 3 or 4 years ago. I'm on the other side of it now, and I see what God did, and I see what he was, where he was going with that now. And that can help me, just reground myself in the fact that, okay, God had a plan in that. He has a plan in this. He's not just going to leave me, in this situation. And if, my biggest fear does play out, I know that he has a reason for it and he has a plan for it. So I just love to look back in my own life and just see how God has worked, even in some things that I was afraid of. And maybe I've gone through those before.
Yeah.
There's a song, an old song. I don't remember who it is. God is in control. Anyone remember that song?
That's really good.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Maybe that.
Do you want to sing us a few more bars?
I don't remember
Okay,
all of it, but maybe that was Kathy Criccioli or something.
Tricoli.
Tricoli.
Yeah.
You guys can
I
turn
don't-
your
I don't
volume back
remember
up
who it
now.
was. Sorry.
Yeah. Warning.
So I just blare that song in my AirPods, and it's like magic.
Calms you down.
No, not really, but I think
Oh, sorry, Kathy.
I-
Kathy Ciccoli.
I don't think that's even her. We can
okay.
Google it, but
Let us know, Eric.
I think it is understand because so much of my fear is when I'm like trying to take control or when I'm putting a lot of energy in. I went last year scuba diving for the first time and I was pretty scared. And I remember like one of the lessons that the instructor gave us or snorkeling was if a wave comes and starts taking you, don't fight it. Like you just have to, your posture inside of that is actually going to work for you and not against you. And if you start to fight it and you start to panic, you get turned around and all of this stuff inside of the current. And then that's when like you get discombobulated and then you actually are creating a bigger mess for yourself. And that's how you're not going to get out of the wave. And so
Yeah.
I think part of that is realizing I don't have control, but I like trust the God who is in control and that, the worst thing is that I don't invite Jesus into that situation. Like I really want, like I've talked about this before, helicopter Jesus to just come in, beam me up, Scotty, and take me out of those situations. But like we don't serve a God who just always pulls us out of it, but we serve a God that's always with us. And we see that happen over and over. And so I think that goes into understanding who I am, who the creator is, and the God's sovereignty. And so, but that I have so little control. No matter how much I try to create or curate my own control or live under the illusion that I control more than I do, I just have such a little control. But I trust in the sovereignty of God and the more I know God, the more I have a trust, like you were saying, I look back. So I think that's where the fear of God, the more I know his character, the more I'm in his word, it's drawing me into him and it's actually driving fear out.
Yeah.
And so that fear of God actually drives out fear of other things because I know he is way more powerful than the situation, way more in control of the situation, way bigger than whatever my circumstances are. And so having a proper fear of God drives out fear of anything that's not him. And so
it's powerful stuff. I think sometimes it's when it's in the moment, when it hits you quick, you aren't prepared to think through all those steps.
Yeah.
Sometimes you, especially if it's a situation you haven't been in, you kind of react and panic. It was Twyla Paris, by the way.
Twyla, I saw you Googling. I was like, what was her name? Sorry, Twyla.
Yeah.
Shoot.
All this is good. I think there's a lot of good reminders that have come up today. And fear and to not let it control you, but also realize that when you're trying to control things that you are probably fearing something. That's something I've heard that a lot of times in life when people start form bad habits or bad addictions or other things going on that you're there's something at the root of it, whether you're fearful of something or whatever, you feel out of control, which is also fear.
Yeah.
It's all good. Thanks everybody for joining me today and having this conversation. It was good. We went a lot of places today. Alex dropped his keys.
I'm just dropping
You're
everything.
just making all kinds of noise today. Anyways, if you want to reach out to us, you can on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you there. Any questions, suggestions, or maybe headlines. If you see something you want us to talk about, we'd like to hear from you. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.